Hello and welcome to today's tutorial, which is going to be a procedural smoke tutorial in After Effects. The reason it's procedural is so that we can save this project and come back to it at a later date and change a few settings to create a different looking smoke effect. We will be able to use this smoke effect in footage moving forward, and a later tutorial down the line will cover that. But for this one, we are just going to create the smoke effect. So first thing that we need to do is to create a new composition. I'm going to name it smoke. I'll make sure that I'm working in a full HD resolution, which is 1920 by 1080. And then I'm going to make sure that the duration is 10 seconds. So the duration might be different on yours, but you can change it by putting 0 semicolon 00 semicolon 10 semicolon 00, and where we've put the 10 is the seconds mark, and everything else is minutes, hours and microseconds. Alright, so the first thing that we want to do when we're in here is to check that everything is set up accordingly. So what I would probably first do is make sure that I've got all the right tabs open, such as these down here. So today we're going to be using something called a track mat, which will mean that we need to expand the transfer controls pane. So I'm going to click that open, and then I'm going to right click in our layers panel and go to new and create a new solid. And then I'm just going to create it as it is, making sure that the color is black. Right, so now that we've got that, I can start getting an effect on this. So I'm going to go to my effects and presets tab up here, and I'm going to type in Fractal Noise. And the noise and grain option is the one that I would like to use. And then we get something like this. So it looks a little bit like white noise. I'm just going to change that up to a third, so we get a bit higher resolution in our viewing window. And then I just want to change some settings on this fractal noise. So I want to change the fractal type from basic to dynamic, so we get all these like little spindles coming off of it, and it looks a bit webby. The reason for this is so that when we track this onto our actual smoke effect, that we get a bit more detail, and the smoke looks a bit wispier and things like that. But I don't want to just keep it like this. I want to have this animated as well. So I'm going to make sure that I'm on the first frame of the project and set a keyframe by clicking this stopwatch icon on the evolution of this effect. And now that I've done that, I can go right across to this 10-second mark, and I just want to change this this value here to around 10. So the evolution of this kind of works on a 360 degree kind of wheel here, and when it's hit 360, then it will go on to the next version of the evolution. So 10 evolutions right the way through is enough for this this kind of effect that we're going for. And if we were to watch that, it looks a little bit like lava moving, which is exactly what we're looking for. But I don't only want to change the evolution, I also want this to move upwards with our smoke. So I'm going to open up the transform tab on this effect, and I'm going to make sure that I'm on the first frame of the project and set a keyframe by clicking the stopwatch icon on the offset turbulence. And then I'm going to go ahead and drag the time slider all the way to 10 seconds again, and then I'm going to move the y-axis on this offset turbulence. So we've got our x-axis at the 960 and the y-axis with the 540, and I'm going to make sure that I drag this about 1,000 pixels or so, maybe a little bit more, maybe 1,200 or something, a little bit like that. Just so that we can, when I play this back, we have it moving up and evolving at the same time. And that's quite a nice speed that we have it at here. Right, so now that we've got that, I'm going to right click on this on this black solid, and I'm going to pre-compose it. And I'm going to call this smoke map. And now that I've got the smoke map, I can hide it by clicking the eye icon on the layer that we have selected. And now we've got this black screen again, I want to right click in the layer panel and go to new and create another new solid. This time I'm going to name it as it comes up, and I'm going to name it particles. And as you might have guessed, the first thing that we want in here is to get a particle system. So we are looking for CC particle systems 2, and we're just going to drag that on there. So this is where we start fiddling with settings a bit more, depending on what we want it to look like when it's emitting the smoke. So the first thing that I really should change is the birth rate, and I'm just going to set this down to 2. And I might even change the longevity to about 1.4, maybe 1.2. And I'm going to go on to a little bit further in the time slider so I can see what's going on here. So it's still quite fast. That's probably a little bit better, but it's also a bit erratic. That might be due to the way it's being produced. So we're going to open up the producer drop-down window, and we're going to make sure that we drag this down a bit, and we're going to make the producer a little bit smaller. And then we're going to move on to the physics tab. So the type of animation that we want to happen is we want it to be twirly. So it's not as erratic going outwards, and they're not just going straight outwards, they're going kind of any direction that there is available to them. With that in mind, I could change the gravity to -1, so it will go in the opposite direction, so it will start raising instead of going down. And then we could start fiddling with the resistance. So I would probably have the resistance between 50 and 75, depending on how much we have changed the birth rate. I'm just going to bump the birth rate up a little bit. And then probably change the velocity to make it slightly slimmer. Once we've got that, the physics part of this out the way, we can start looking at the particle parts of this. So these particles are very small lines at the moment, and we want to change them to bubbles. And as you can see, straight away we've got these bubbles that start off yellow, and then as they fade off they turn red. So, but I want all of it to stay white. So I'm going to change the birth colour and the death colour to white. Alright, so with that out the way, we can start fiddling with how these bubbles look. So to do that, I want to get a turbulent displace. Drag that on here. I'm going to keep the displacement at turbulent. I'm going to change the amount. I'll probably turn it down slightly. And the size, turn it up a little bit and turn the size down. So that we're probably on something like 16 to 20. Probably turn that down a bit as well. Get that to probably a bit more like a 70. All right. And now that we've got that, I want to start blurring this. So the type of blur that we're going to use is called a CC vector blur, which is one of the first ones that we've got on here. So there are 2 ways that I want to blur this. So this first type of blur is going to be direction fading. And we're going to turn that, we're going to do this coming inwards on these bubbles. So we're going to set it to -10. And then we're going to leave that as it is at that point. Yes, we are. But I am going to duplicate this and then set the second vector blur to direction center, but I'm going to change the amount to 15 on this one. And as you can see, we're already getting a bit more of a smokier look to this. So now that we've got this smokier look and it's starting to look wispy and all that, I'm going to bring in another turbulent displace. Drag that onto here, but but this time I'm going to set it to bulge, and we're going to turn the amount right down or up depending on what we want it to look like. But I think if we set it down a bit, it looks fairly good like that. Yeah, I quite like that. So I'm going to start changing the I'm just going to get in a transform effect in here, just to distort it, and I'm going to uncheck this uniform scale here so that I can change the scale height and the scale width independent of one another, and I just want to make this a bit thinner. So the scale width I've turned down to about 60, but this can change depending on what you're after. And then we've got a bit of a thinner smoke effect. Alright, so that's all the effects that we want to put on this particle system here. So I'm going to go to about 5 seconds in, and I'm going to make sure that we can see the fractal noise behind the smoke. And with that in mind, I can now change this track matte to an alpha matte on the particle layer. And with that in mind, it's showing these wispy kind of it's showing the fractal noise through our smoke, and we can see a bit more detail on here, and we can see it manipulating and changing as it goes. The only thing that I would like to see a bit more on here is probably I'd like it to be a bit brighter really, so I'm going to get a brightness and contrast effect on there, and then I'm just going to ramp the brightness up a bit until I'm happy with it. 50 to 60s looks pretty good to me, and then we get this nice looking smoke effect. And like I said, this is a procedural kind of effect that you can play around with, and all the numbers that I've used for all of these settings can be different numbers depending on what you're looking for. You can make it thinner, you can make it a bit fatter. It doesn't really matter, it's entirely up to you. Yeah, so all we need to do now is to render this out. So we will do that by going to Export and add to Adobe Media Encoder Q. So I am going to let that load up and then edit this together. So I'll see you when the render is open. And we're back. So you might have this as a H.264. So all we want to do is we want to change this to an animated GIF, and then we want to put it in the right place. So for me, the right place is going to be in with all my other any other work that I've done up to this point, and I'm going to put it in a smoke folder, and I'm just going to name it smoke, so that, and replace that, and then all I need to do is hit this green play button, and then we are completed with this tutorial. Alright, so when this renders out, I will be putting it at the end of this clip, at the end of this video. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.